Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the afternoon session of what I think has been a brilliant conference already. My only issue is having to follow Bruce Peter. I don't have a personality like that. I don't think anyone has. He's a fantastic chair, a masterclass in how to chair a conference, so thank you very much, Bruce. It is a great honour, of course, to be asked back. And since everyone, well, there has been a theme around family and the First World War and all of this, which has been very moving and touching. And so in an unscripted bit, I just wanted to share with you a story that might sound a wee bit familiar. It's about my own family. My grandfather, who was a migrant who came to Glasgow in the later 19th century, joined the police, did rather well, became a police clerk, had 11 children, one of whom was my father, of course, another one of whom was his son, James, who was killed in action on the first day of the Somme. So a lot of these themes are coming together for me. Also, my grandfather, Charles McInnes, was less than forthcoming about his origins, and there are all sorts of reasons for that. And if any of this is striking a chord and reminding you of a famous Glaswegian, is possibly Charles Rennie Mackintosh's father, who was also a migrant, who came from Belturbet in County Cavan, but neglected to tell anyone exactly where he had come from. And this was an issue, it's a whole other subject, but it's quite an interesting one. Now, when Rachel sent me an email and said, "You've got 15 minutes to introduce yourself," and I should have said, of course, that my name is Ranald McInnes. I work for Historic Environment Scotland, which is the new body that has been created out of two existing bodies, the Royal Commission of Ancient Historical Monuments of Scotland and Historic Scotland. And this was very recently, October the 1st, enacted literally through legislation, and so far it has been a very big success. But as I was saying, Rachel had said, welcome our attendees, which I've done, and voice any further opinions and thoughts. Now, that was asking for trouble when speaking to me, but don't worry though, I'm not going to burden you with my opinions. The word has, I think, taken on or has a rather negative connotation. I was giving evidence once at a public inquiry, which is a very severe and public form of torture for civil servants. I was talking about the relative merits of a listed building. And the advocate on the other side, on the applicant's side, stopped me and said, "Excuse me, but that is only your opinion," which irritated me a wee bit. And I said, well, the only reason I'm here is to give you my opinion. So, and I think when we're talking about the relative importance of architects and artists and buildings and movements, opinions are, of course, paramount. It's the clash of opinions that takes knowledge and understanding forward. It is not a bad thing to have an opinion and to share it with others and be prepared to have it challenged by others. But the last time I spoke at the inaugural Gilded Age conference, I did venture an opinion, and that was that politics was everything. And of course, I was very gratified to see David's slide of Blake's remark that religion is politics. And even if we think of the term Gilded Age, we imagine a time, I think, of great wealth, but also of poverty, which Gordon has described. And the idea of gilding, symbolizing conspicuous consumption, I think is very apposite in Glasgow. Think of something that Lord Provost Bain's house, Sir James Bain's house at 3 Park Terrace. Any of you, I guess you will all have seen this, there have been queues around the block on Doors Open Day in the past. It's the gilding is gilded, if I could put it like that. But it's possible to see, and others have seen in Mackintosh's simplicity and purity of line and colour, a reaction to some of the more overblown schemes of interior decoration with which his own firm was involved. In Craigie Hall, which John showed, would be, in my opinion, an example of this. So you were seeing gilding, marbling, the idea of surface treatments, even within the work of Mackintosh's own firm. But much of this, much of Mackintosh's new attitude, the new purity, if you like, was presaged in the work of the Leapers generation aesthetic interiors, which I think still does not get the credit for being the seedbed of Mackintosh's ideas. And I know this is a great theme of David's work. And not only his ideas, but his attitudes to art and architecture. He's still regarded in many quarters as a kind of solitary genius, a lonely international genius. But I think in looking so closely now, as we are at Mackintosh's School of Art, in light of the great calamity that happened there, it becomes, I think, increasingly difficult, meaningfully, to separate art from architecture. We have this fusion in Glasgow, and listening to Robin Webster, I think we saw this in action. The idea of the designer and the craftsman being one and the same person, the idea of studying architecture, then taking up stained glass. And this was all, I think the Webster family is a great example of that. And Dr. George Rawson, who is about to take the stage, will be talking about this phenomenon. And this was largely encouraged, of course, and set up by Fra Newbery, the headmaster, the principal of Glasgow School of Art. And George's original PhD was on the life and work of Fra Newbery. George is a well-known art historian and, of course, the former librarian of Glasgow School of Art. He's also an authority on Mackintosh, and he's preparing to publish a book very shortly on Mackintosh's early artistic sojourn in Italy. So he's retraced Mackintosh's steps in Italy and reported on what he finds there, relating that back to Mackintosh's artistic achievement in Glasgow. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing that book in print, and also looking forward to hearing what George has to say this afternoon. Thanks. George.
Right. Alf Webster was a student at the Glasgow School of Art in the sessions 1903 to 4, 1904 to 5, and with a gap, 1906 to 7. That was at a time when the school was one of the preeminent art academies in Europe, with a truly international scope. With the completion of its new building in 1909, it was the best planned and the best equipped School of Art in Great Britain. That's what contemporaries said. It was also an important centre in the culture of its home city, directing the development of art education in schools and evening classes throughout the whole of the west of Scotland, from Dumfries to Sutherland, providing an in-service training for over 2,000 teachers between 1901 and 1914 in the teaching of drawing, pioneering the teaching of art needlework in schools, providing public lectures on art in its own lecture theatre, and promoting theatrical and musical entertainments through the involvement of leading actors such as, probably not heard of any longer, Sir Frank Benson, a big Shakespearean actor of the time, and his company. And Lily Langtry even came and gave recitals at the school. The Glasgow boy, D.Y. Cameron, referred to the school as the heart of Glasgow, to enter whose doors filled him with an ecstasy of hope. Its international standing was attested to by the calibre of the teachers, drawn largely from continental Europe, who headed its different departments. I can get these. Oh, this is Newbery. He isn't from the continent of Europe. He's from Dorset. Newbery was a fantastically good teacher, an inspirer of his students. He He was also a great networker. Newbery knew everyone, it seems, who was anybody in Britain and probably across Europe at the time. And he was also a great promoter of his students' work through journals and newspapers. So this has a lot to do with the development, the international fame of the Glasgow Style. A lot of it's down to Newbery. So that he was a director, first a headmaster from 1885 to about 1901. Then his title changes to director round about 1901. Come on. Oh well. I'm pressing this hard. There we are. Right. To just run through a few of the internationally important gentlemen, no ladies, who were heading the staff. Newbery divided his school into 4 departments around about 1901. That's when he gets the title director. These guys are professors. This is the drawing and painting department. The life professor on the left is Jean Delville, major Belgian symbolist, one of the leaders of the international symbolist movement. His deputy, Professor Paul Artaud, also a Belgian, was professor of antique. Also, it would seem from looking at his paintings, the ones I'd seen, a symbolist. Gee whiz. Come on. Sorry, that's what I have to do. This is the answer. Thank you. Right. I don't know. Right. This is another Belgian who came on a little bit later than Artaud and Delville. He comes along around about 1906 or so. This is Georges Balthus. Georges Balthus, also, it seems, a symbolist from Belgium, was taught art history, but he also taught art criticism. He looked at what was happening now rather than just looking at the Renaissance and so on. And he also taught technique, as it was called. This guy taught egg tempera, fresco, cassine, you name it, he could do it, and he showed the students how to do it. Right, after Delville left in 1905, he was replaced by Mr. Greifenhagen, of Danish extraction, but English, from London. He was a Royal Academician. A superb draftsman, portrait painter, a bit of a muralist. I don't think he was very good at that. But and he's sitting next to Newbery, you can see. This is a group of students. Hey, come on. What am I doing wrong now? Next, please. Right. This is the architecture department. The man with a wonderful moustache. He's French. This is Eugène Bourdon, who reformed the whole of architecture teaching. Don't ask me about this, but he ran a Beaux-Arts course, right, it developed in France, in Paris. Comes in about 1905, starts in 1905, so Alf Webster misses him, really, as a student. And he ran the Glasgow School of Architecture, which was an amalgamation of what was being done in the art school, the architecture teaching in the art school, which was looked after by Sandy McGibbon on the right, and Charles Gourlay, who was at the Glasgow and West of Scotland Technical College, now the University of Strathclyde, on the left. Next, please. This is the head of sculpture, Professor Johan Keller. Yes, he's a Dutchman. So pretty much everybody is from the continent. Next, please. Except for this man. This is quite late on, just before the Great War. This man is an American, Paul Wayland Bartlett, who was who only was a professor of sculpture just quite late on, merging into the First World War. This photograph shows him working on his major project, one of the 2 pediments of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. He had big connections with Paris as well. So you've got this international coverage. This is not going to work, is it? Yeah, next, please. And this is Robert Anning Bell, another Englishman, another Royal Academician, who later on ran the Design and Decorative Art department. He's in the middle. The rest are ladies, yes. He was probably, after the death of Walter Crane, the most versatile artist craftsman in the country. And he was also eventually Professor of Decorative Art at the Royal College of Art, at the same time as he was doing this job here. I think that's enough for staff. There are others, of course, but they're the main ones. Yeah, okay. The school's international reputation had been built up in the 1890s. Newbury, and this is Newbury represented in stained glass by the first teacher of stained glass in the school, Norman McDougall, represented as painting here. The school's reputation had been built up in the 1890s. Newbury believed that the purpose of art education was to enable the student to become a master of his craft and to discover his own artistic personality, his individuality as an artist. Thus, he encouraged experimentation and a certain amount of openness to the latest artistic developments. This had resulted in the emergence of the Glasgow Style around 1893. Also in 1893, Newbury was amongst the first of art school headmasters to open a suite of arts and crafts studios in his school, which enabled his students to reproduce their paper designs, because designs were always done on paper before this, in different media. Their work in stained glass, repoussé metalwork, that's one by Margaret MacDonald in stained glass. Come on. Next, please. Repoussé metalwork. Next, please. As posters using lithographic techniques. Next, please. In art needlework. Next, please. Bookbinding and illustration and other media could be shown in the exhibitions of arts and crafts which were coming to the fore from the late 1880s onwards. Craftwork in the Glasgow Style first appeared in the Glasgow School of Art Club exhibition in 1894, an annual show which was well publicised in the local press, by Newbury, of course. It was then shown in Belgium, in Liège. The school had connections with Liège via one of the art school governors, one of the Glasgow boys. Name doesn't come back to me just now. James Guthrie. And at the London Arts and Crafts Exhibition Society in 1896. Newbury was a member of the Arts and Crafts Exhibition Society. And at the Venice Biennale in 1899, at the Paris Universal Exhibition in 1900, where 26 pieces were shown and the gold medal was awarded, at the Vienna Secession in 1900. You can go on. Glasgow International Exhibition 1901, Budapest 1902, Modern Decorative Art Exhibition in Turin 1902, which was probably the apogee of the Glasgow Style. Next, please. That's Macintosh's room there. Now, this is interesting in that 44 artists from the school, artists and students, many of them students, showed at this exhibition, and 11 of those later became members of staff. It even had an impact beyond Europe. In 1904, at the St. Louis World's Fair, where American commentators were apparently unanimous in saying that the work of the Glasgow School of Art is unsurpassed in Great Britain, and the general excellence of Great Britain in the teaching of art can hardly be called in question. It was around this time, of course, that Alf Webster enrolled in the school as an evening student. In 1900, the first stage, next please, I think it's the next after that one. Oh, that was shown in Turin. Next, please. Yeah. In 1900, the first stage of Macintosh's new purpose-built school was opened. Its intended capacity was some 650 students attending during the day, but with the majority attending during the evenings. In its first year of occupancy, however, around 750 students had enrolled. That's 100 more than were expected. And in the following two sessions, numbers had peaked to around 840. This meant that the accommodation was severely stretched, with effects on timetabling, and the rooms available would have to be put to multiple uses. Next, please. This shows the school's museum with an ornament drawing class at the front. Also, apparently, there was an antique class had to be put in there as well. And can I have the next slide, please? And at the back was the library. So, yeah, conditions were quite cramped. And this would affect where Alf Webster would have to work when he was a student as well. So, the school's register, I've looked at the school's registers where Alf Webster is mentioned. The school's register for 1903 records that the new entrant, Alf Webster, was 20 years of age and that he resided at 35 Leven Street, Pollokshields. And under the column for occupation, noted that he was an architect. Does this mean that he was articled to an architectural firm? Probably not. Or just that he was enrolled as a student in the school's architecture department? Probably more likely. In the 1901 census, at 17 years of age, he had been employed as a shipbroker's clerk, and we've covered that to a certain extent. Whatever his profession, he did embark on the architectural course. The register records that his architectural teacher was Walter Robert Watson, who was a partner in the firm of Cowan and Watson, architects to the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Glasgow. And he was actually working at this very time on part of St. Aloysius' school. The course at this time was only open to evening students and was headed by Alexander McGibbon, whom we saw earlier. Geared to Newbury's view that the architect should first and foremost be an artist, it had a strong thread of fine art teaching running through it to develop the students' drawing abilities and to sensitize them to architectural aesthetics and the function of fine and decorative art in an architectural context. It was meant to last 4 years if a student worked at it full time, and the first 2 years led up to the RIBA's intermediate certificate. Before entering on the course, as it existed in 1904, students were required to develop basic drawing skills, both freehand and with instruments. Next, please. Yeah, this is pretty simple stuff. It goes back to the 19th century when most students entering art schools couldn't draw to save themselves, and so they were made to copy very simple bits of ornament. So there's still an element of that left over from the 19th century. The basic drawing skills, both freehand and with instruments, in a preparatory course. Elementary freehand geometry, perspective, and model drawing. Next, please. This is model drawing. It's nothing to do with the life model at all. There is a photograph in the art school's archives which shows these models lying in the basement corridor. Also included were plants and flowers from nature. Next, please. This is what we are told is the boardroom. Right from day one, it was the design room. And these people are drawing from plants and flowers. Also, students were required to draw interiors and exteriors of buildings in perspective and the painting of simple objects, whatever that means. However, it is probable that Webster was already a good draftsman. He has to have been, as he was already taking part in the second year course under the direction of David Rollo, someone about whom I can find very little, who taught antique and ornament. Ornament usually came first, and it is most likely that this is what Webster was studying as a new architecture student. Next, please. I think that might do. Yeah, this is a drawing of ornament in light and shade, as they'd put it. The central room on the ground floor was designated for ornament, but space was so much at a premium, as I've already demonstrated, that ornaments classes had also to be held in the museum. Next, please. Yeah, that's that slide again, which shows an ornament class. Watson, as you remember, the architecture teacher, on the other hand, was responsible for teaching building construction, which was divided into 3 stages: elementary, advanced, and honours. New students like Webster would only have taken the elementary course, if at all, I assume. This required him to have mastered the use of drawing instruments and to understand the use of scales in order to demonstrate knowledge gained in lectures by drawing to scale sections and elevations of details of buildings covering brick and stonework, the use of jointing and jointing of timbers, cast iron construction, roofing, and lead work. It is also likely that he would have attended lectures in the classical orders. Next, please. That's just one diagram, of which there were many that they would copy. And the development of architecture up to the medieval period. These were given in the main architecture classroom at the eastern end of the ground floor. The registers also record that he took a course in modelling. Next, please. The elementary modelling master was a man called George Gregory, who had recently been recruited from the leading London firm of architectural sculptors, Farmer and Brindley. Under him, Webster would have been required to model architectural ornament in the elementary modelling room, the central of 3 studios in the north side of the basement corridor. Webster also took 2 other courses which fell under the remit of the decorative art department: furniture design and stained glass. Next, please. The furniture design was a new course run by E.A. Taylor, the leading designer of the firm of Wiley and Lochhead, who had recently been responsible for the rooms they exhibited in the 1901 Glasgow International Exhibition in Kelvin Grove Park. Owing to shortage of space, this class was run in one of the 2 small luncheon rooms which were accessed from the half landing of the central staircase. The stained glass studio, next please, was even more incommodiously situated in a wooden shed which leaked and was inadequately heated. The new stained glass teacher appointed in 1903 was Stephen Adam Jr. It seems probable that Webster had already exhibited a strong interest in and propensity for stained glass design, as it was unusual for an architecture student to study in the stained glass studio. And if the prospectus of that year is to be believed, it was only the most advanced design students who were allowed to work in any of the craft studios. Oh yeah, next please. This shows Macintosh's drawing for these sheds, which looks quite different from the sheds in the previous drawing. I don't know what happened there. By the time that Webster enrolled for his second year, 1904-5, at the school, he had dropped the idea of training as an architect and had almost certainly decided to make his career as a stained glass designer. That fits in with what we've already discovered. In the register, he now entered his occupation as designer, without specifying his chosen medium. But unusually for a designer, he was enrolled in the drawing and painting course. His teacher was James Huck, who, right, next please. All right, James Huck. That is James Huck. And you see Newbury's at the side here, because he was very heavily involved in the drawing and painting department, and that's Delville at the front. The problem is with this, I keep losing my place when I look at... Anyway, his teacher was James Huck. Dear. Right, okay, James Huck was one of the star pupils of Delville. And he had won... Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, sorry, that's a Delville painting, as you've already seen. It's called L'amour des âmes, Love of the Souls, being a bad translation of it. And this was one of the reasons why Delville was appointed in the first place to the professorship of to be a life professor. Newbury had discovered Delville on a trip to see the Paris Universal Exhibition in 1900. A major objective of the visit was to find an outstanding master of life drawing and figure composition. And when Newbury saw Delville's huge canvas, Love of the Souls, which had been awarded a silver medal in the exhibition, he believed that he might have found his man. Delville, as a student at the Brussels École des Beaux-Arts, had won the coveted Prix de Rome for figure composition and was a leading member in the international symbolist movement. He was also a Platonist and theosophist who believed that art had a spiritual mission. In his book, The New Mission of Art, a study of idealism in art, he accorded the nude a central role. Next slide, please. Right. Claiming that the nude is the alpha and omega of aesthetics. All the science possessed by the artist is summarized in it. It is fitted to summarize the most profound emotions of the soul. Bad translators, using summarize twice in 2 sentences. Now, as a Platonist, now this is the school of Plato. His painting, which was, I believe, done for the Sorbonne. It's now in the Musée d'Orsay. Big thing. these rather effete-looking gentlemen sitting around this, is that Plato or is it Christ? I think it's meant to be both in a way. As a Platonist, he claimed that beauty is the synonym of truth. The task of the artist is to penetrate surface appearances and extract the spiritual essence from the material world. Nature is not art, but art is concealed in nature like a supernatural treasure. Genius lies in seeing the glitter of this treasure through the physical density of matter. For the successful realization of beauty in a work of art, 3 attributes were required to be present. Spiritual beauty, in the form of a lofty conception of the idea expressed by the work. Plastic beauty, the perfection or idealization of the forms abstracted from nature. And technical beauty, the realization of the 2 previous attributes in the physical work. This last was a call for the artist to be a master craftsman, a master of his materials to realize his conception. Delville insisted that his students should draw and paint from the model life-size. Next, please. This is a ladies' class painting from the model life-size, as you can see, which was his own practice, which he demonstrated before his class. Newbery was a firm advocate of teaching by demonstration, which is just as well as Delville had a poor command of English. And an Italian, Fernando Agnoletti, was paid 10 shillings a week to translate his bon mot. Yet it should be underlined that Delville was not just appointed to teach life drawing and painting. The ultimate purpose of his role was to teach figure composition, as the 1903 prospectus stated. Composition is itself the most important part of an artistic education because it is the synthesis and gathering up of all knowledge previously gained, and it has for its end the development of the higher faculties, which sooner or later every artist must possess. The school's appointment of Delville was acclaimed in the leading art periodical The Studio in 1903. Foreign professors of recognized ability in their respective branches of art have now been placed in charge of the higher departments of the school, and their influence is evident, especially in the figure composition work, which is of an unusually high order of merit. Inability to converse with students in their own tongue is here seen to be no drawback, and the very silence of the tuition is an eloquent testimony to the universal language of art in its appeal to the understanding, and furnishes an additional proof, if that be required, of the fact that the voice is best replaced by the hand in art education. Having said all of this, it is unlikely that Delville would have taught Webster, but James Huck, who we saw earlier, who supervised Webster in the ornament class and probably into the antique class as well, may have begun to guide his work in the antique studio, had so impressed Delville and Newbery as a student that he had been awarded a travelling scholarship to tour the continent, as well as winning, next one please, the Bram Stoker Medal. No, you didn't mishear me. Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula, for the most imaginative figure composition of the year in 1904. Next, please. This could well have been something like the painting produced by David Broadfoot Carter, the previous year's winner, which was published in The Studio. In the session 1906-07, Webster's final year, he was now residing at 122 York Drive, Hindland, and entered his occupation as designer, stained glass. By this time, he was definitely enrolled in the antique class, as his teacher was the Professor Paul Artaud, whom we saw earlier. Next, please. Yeah, that's one of Artaud's paintings called Crépuscule. I think it's painted in egg tempera, which was one of Delville's favoured media as well. Antique was taught alongside artistic anatomy under the care of the able master James Dunlop. Next, please. Yeah, Dunlop's there. This is a little bit before Artaud was on the staff, I think. Yeah. Artaud also ran an animal painting class in the eastern studio of the basement floor adjacent to the street, where large double doors admitted horses from the local tram depot and the occasional camel and elephant from the Glasgow Zoo, then situated in Cowcaddens at the other side of Garnet Hill. By this time, Delville had left and had been replaced by the English painter Maurice Greifenhagen. In future years, Greifenhagen, Newbery, and the heads of the design department were increasingly to lay more emphasis on the role of figure composition in the context of architecture. Now, Owen Jones, in his seminal work, The Grammar of Ornament, published in 1856, and it's still important, a major textbook in all art schools, had laid down the proposition: the decorative arts arise from and should properly be dependent upon architecture. And the influential critic John Ruskin, in his book The Two Paths, published in 1859, took the idea further by arguing that all the visual arts were essentially ornamental and best fulfilled their purpose in relation to architecture, claiming that the easel paintings shown annually at London's Royal Academy were an inferior species when compared to the great mural schemes produced for the adornment of buildings by such artists as Raphael. It is no coincidence that Newbery's most admired contemporary building... Next slide, please. Oh, no, that's just to show you something from James Dunlop's book on artistic anatomy. Next, please. And that's an example of a piece of work in the antique school done by one of the students. Next, please. Yeah. OK, we're on to this now. It is no coincidence that Newbery's most admired contemporary building was John Belcher's Institute of Chartered Accountants in the City of London. In 1893, the year of its completion, Charles Rennie Mackintosh himself had listed Belcher amongst his architectural heroes, and the building was generally admired amongst progressive architects and designers for its successful integration, next please, of sculpture with architecture. Next please. Yeah. Frescoes were also designed for its major interior space based on Raphael's work for Pope Julius II in the Vatican. The sculpture work had been carried out by two of Britain's leading sculptors, Hamo Thornycroft and Harry Bates. Harry Bates was actually trained by the same man who trained Newbery at the National Art Training School back in London, when Newbery was there. The subsidiary carving had been done by Farmer and Brindley, for whom the school's elementary modelling instructor George Gregory had worked. If Belcher's building had sought to integrate the fine arts of architecture, sculpture and painting in one building, the same could be said of a building much nearer to home. Next, please. Mackintosh's Glasgow School of Art, which perhaps went further in its inclusion of several of the crafts. Owen Jones's decorative arts, as they were called, referred to by the artist-craftsman William Morris as the lesser arts. Sculpture is represented over the main doorway and the library windows. Next, please. Were intended to be flanked by figure sculptures of Benvenuto Cellini to represent the crafts, Palladio for architecture, and St. Francis of Assisi, probably a reference to Newbery, who was called Francis, of course. The identity of the other figures will probably remain a mystery. Another form of sculpture was the next, please. Was the symbolistic wrought iron work on the railings and on this next, please. And there as well, wrong way around, on the railings and on the finials on the roof, representing the Glasgow coat of arms. And the flower-like supports for the large studio windows as well. Newbery was quite a fan of wrought iron work, and he went around England spotting little things like boot scrapers outside churches, which are done obviously by the local the local, local guy. And it comes out in the building. And then next, please. And there was stained glass on many of the interior doors. These are the doors of the painting studios, and they're adorned with depictions of roses, which, according to Newbery, symbolized painting. There were next, please. There were carved representations of the lily in bud. I take this to be a lily in bud on the doors of the studios in the basement, because Newbery said that the lily represented sculpture. Next, please. And carved wooden pendants in the library are possibly indicative of seeds falling from the tree of knowledge. That's my theory. There are also ceramic tiles. Next, please. on the east and west staircases, and it was even intended to install a painted frieze of figures. Next, please. Yeah. In the school's museum, its main interior space. But this was never realised, of course, despite Newbury's hope that it would be. Newbury, however, was slightly more successful in his efforts to gain permission for his students to produce figure compositions for Glasgow's public buildings. These were allowed to work. They were allowed to work in two public libraries, Postle Park and Langside. The scheme at Postle Park, next please, was realised and can still be seen today. The mural at Langside, next please. Oh no, that's Postle Park as well. Next please. Bad photograph. Would only be carried out after the Great War and was probably mainly the work of Greifenhagen himself. It's attributed to him. To further such projects, a professor was appointed to oversee the teaching of composition in 1913, so that's a bit near to the war, and it's going to be problematical. This was Frederick Cayley Robinson. Next, please. Who had recently completed a mural scheme in the Middlesex Hospital in London. Next, please. These are huge things. There are 4 of them. And they're now owned by the Wellcome Trust. His influence can be seen. Yeah, next, please. This is a typical Cayley Robinson painting. He likes to draw paint people in interiors with windows behind them. And next, please. And his influence can be seen by the work of one of his students, James Cowie, one of the leading Scottish painters of the interwar years. Next, please. Another student who worked as a muralist was Robert Civil, who worked in Aberdeen mainly. Next, please. And this work by Archibald McGlashan also suggests that it was intended as a mural. That Alf Webster chose to pursue his studies in the drawing and painting department, whose ultimate objective was figure composition in an architectural context, rather than the design and decorative art department where most stained glass students would have worked, strongly suggests then that his main objective in using the school was to explore the possibilities of figure composition in the medium of stained glass. As he was working full-time as a stained glass designer in Stephen Adams' far better equipped commercial studio, there was little need for him to take on any more tuition at the School of Art. Webster's career ended sadly with his death in the Great War, and in many ways the war brought an end to the golden period in the history of the School of Art. Next, please. This is a poster by Greifenhagen in aid of the Red Cross for the war. Student numbers fell from 1,357 in 1913 to 14 to 585 in 1916 to 17. And by 1917, 400 staff and students had enlisted, and 34, including the French professor of architecture, Eugène Bourdon, had been killed. It became increasingly more difficult and disheartening to keep going. That was Newbury's view, perhaps as a reflection of what D.Y. Cameron had said earlier about hope being inspired by going into the School of Art. Newbury wrote a letter to D.Y. Cameron in October 1916. In it he said, "Only force of will enables one to carry on art and art education. The brightest colours that art can assume at the present time not only fail to attract attention, but like a gaily dressed woman at a funeral, mankind wonders that she shows herself at all." He added that it was the artist's task to continue working and hoping. But for him, for Newbury at least, this was too much to hope for. He had suffered a mental breakdown as a result of overwork and the effects of the war in 1914, and was forced to retire in 1918 after a more severe recurrence in 1917. Thank you.